Hello, class. How many of you have had an infection? How many of you have had an infection that would not be treated without the use of antibiotics? Antibiotics are one of the greatest inventions of modern medicine, and without antibiotics, people like you and I would die from simple infections like UTIs or ear infections. Something that we take for granted and think of as being such a minor medical concern would be a huge medical concern without antibiotics. The purpose of my speech today is to inform you, my audience, about the importance of understanding antibiotic resistance and its negative health implications. While antibiotics, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the greatest inventions of modern medicine, without serious antibiotic mitigation in agriculture, the effectiveness of antibiotics in humans will be at risk long term. Unfortunately, the post-antibiotic era is coming sooner than many realize, and it will unfortunately be the result of many deaths worldwide. Bacteria mutate and become immune to antibiotics over time. Unfortunately, immoral pharmaceutical companies push to overprescribe antibiotics in farm animals when they really don't need them. As a result, bacteria are mutating faster than ever before, and antibiotics can unfortunately not keep up with the fast mutation of bacteria. So what is my credibility and relevance to this subject? Well, I believe I'm a credible resource to discuss the overuse of antibiotics in agriculture because of the prerequisites I've taken for nursing school. I've taken a traditional biology course, microbiology, chemistry, and intro to organic chemistry. My science foundation provides me with enough knowledge to discuss the overuse of antibiotics and its associated negative implications. So the three takeaways that I hope for you, the audience, to come out of with this speech is to know what bacteria is, what antibiotics are, and why antibiotic resistance could become closer than we realize. The objective for this speech is to first discuss what is bacteria. So this is a picture of bacteria, specifically staph bacteria. Bacteria are unicellular microorganisms and come in all shapes and different sizes and different categories. Like I mentioned earlier, this is staph bacteria. One thing to keep in mind is I'm sure you've heard of antibiotics, like I've been talking about, and probiotics. So they're actually, not all bacteria is necessarily bad. Some bacteria is good. But unfortunately, bad bacteria have the potential of causing diseases like gonorrhea, meningitis, tetanus, etc., and many more that you've likely heard of. Urinary tract infections are actually one of the most common infections, and they affect both men and women, but predominantly women. And according to the Center of Disease Control, UTIs are the most frequent bacterial infection in women and account for nearly 25% of all infections each year in women. So with all this bacteria that can cause disease, who invented the first antibiotic? Well, that is responsible from Alexander Fleming, who was a physician who invented the first antibiotic that is a household name, called penicillin. Without penicillin, people like you and I could die from simple things like UTIs. So, moving forward, what are antibiotics? Like I mentioned earlier, here is Alexander Fleming, who created penicillin, and this is actually the first culture petri dish in which he invented, or how he invented penicillin. So antibiotics are used to fight off bad bacteria from reproducing, and they work by attacking the cell wall and either killing the bacteria and or preventing them from multiplying. So Staphylococcus bacteria, also known as staph bacteria, is a group of bacteria that helped aid, as I mentioned earlier, in the discovery of penicillin. An uncovered petri dish, right there's the picture of the original one, became contaminated with mold, and Alexander Fleming realized this, that the petri dish became contaminated with mold, and that the bacteria near the mold were dying. So he isolated this mold and identified it as penicillin, and as a result, today penicillin became the first effective antibiotic against gram-positive bacteria. So, according to the Center for Disease and Prevention, in 2015 alone, approximately 269 million antibiotic prescriptions were dispensed from outpatient pharmacies in the United States. This is a staggering figure, and they estimate that for 1 out of every 6 of those people, of the 269 million, received one antibiotic prescription each year. From that statistic alone, you can see truly how important antibiotics are for the healthcare system. So I once experienced an infection in my collarbone after surgery, and was prescribed 14 days worth of doxycycline after my surgery. And doxycycline is one of the most common antibiotics that is used to treat many different infections like UTIs. So you may be asking yourself, if we have such an effective solution for treating bacterial infections, how will it be compromised? Hence, here comes my third point. So, bacterial mutation occurs from the overuse of antibiotics in animal farms. So, bacteria mutate by dividing and multiplying, creating new DNA copies. The production of new antibiotics, unfortunately, will not be able to keep up with bacteria mutating at an alarming rate. For example, there are already cases of patients who cannot fight off gonorrhea, a very common STD, and so this is called the super gonorrhea strain. And there's already patients across the world that are experiencing this. So pharmaceutical companies are unethical, as I mentioned earlier. They overpush the use of antibiotics and use it when it is unnecessary in animal farms, and they are really at the foundation of the problem. According to the USDA, the USDA estimates that 80% of antibiotics produced in the U.S. are used in animal production, and over 32 million pounds in 2013 alone. The immense use of antibiotics in farm animals develops antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The overuse of antibiotics in animals may raise the risk of transmitting drug-resistant bacteria to humans, because resistant bacteria can be transmitted through humans through direct contact with animals, or exposure to animal manure, or through the consumption of uncooked meat. Hence, the post-antibiotic era is coming sooner than many of us realize. And so I suggest that, or hope to persuade you guys into converting into more of a vegetarian diet, and because the implications of antibiotic resistant bacteria could be irreversible. As Alexander Fleming, the founder of penicillin, once said, penicillin sat on the shelf for 10 years and I was called a quack. Thank you.